the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
Hey everyone, it's Nippy here. Here's a replay from the vaults that was originally broadcast especially for our Little Bit Culty Patreon crowd. You can get more of this kind of thing, plus ad-free flagship episodes and other exclusive treats if you hang out with us on Patreon. Cold chillin'. Sometimes we Zoom, sometimes we make word salads, you never know. So come on over, why don't you? All the cool kids are doing it on Patreon. Find us at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Patreon people, guys, this is like totally blowing my mind. I remember hearing about Patreon when we first started and I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And now this is like,
great.
Don't tell the other people that we love the Patreon people the most. We love you the most.
Sarah,
we're going to love bomb the shit out of you.
Them thing, and that's pretty culty. Just saying.
We're going to love bomb the shit out of you. Just love you.
Little us first them, Sarah. Just pointing it out.
How'd everybody feel about Dr. Marlene Winnell? Nippy, what was the highlight for you of the episode that dropped Monday?
Dr. Marlene Winnell. Okay, first of all, love her intelligence. Number one, I love it when we have a guest that's just like bang on it, knows their shit, drops it like it's hot. A couple things that I noticed that she articulated pretty well from me is, I think, to me, the number one abuse that can go on is when you take someone out of society and you isolate them, because that just puts them behind the eight ball. It makes them dependent. And I think isolation is the worst form of abuse. It stunts your growth. It creates the us versus them. And it creates dependency on whatever group you're in. And it basically says you're not okay or safe without that group. And that is something that will go with you once you're even outside of the group that you have to reconcile. So it really, to me, is the single worst abuse. That's the number one. Number two, amygdala. It explains so much of what's going on today because you have that lower brain function that triggers you, right? Normally it's on social media, but you're not in any danger. And basically, I think if people could understand that what they're witnessing on those social media things are people in fight or flight, just firing off texts and firing off things when they're not having a human interaction with them, right? Because most of the people would be able to reconcile the stuff, I think, if they're interacting with other human beings. But you're interacting with like people's amygdala reactions, it's going to trigger yours. And that's the primal nature that we're seeing on social media. So I think just understanding your hardwiring, understanding your physiology does wonders for understanding your decisions and what's informing them. And I think she did a really, really good job of doing that. And if people could have that education going forward, I think you'd see less of what's going on, particularly on social media. I want to preface that with saying what's going on social media is not necessarily what's going on in the world. But just that whole conversation, to me, it was just really good to let her riff and go on. And she has a lot of good language for it. And she's smart and intelligent and really loved it. One of my favorites. How about you, Sarah? What was your biggest takeaway?
Well, thanks for asking, Anthony. First of all, I'm appreciating, and I hope that our audience does too, that we're trying to balance the episodes with survivors and slightly heavier things with more expert perspectives. And even though she is a survivor, we focused more on her expertise. And I appreciated that. And I got a lot out of it. I specifically, and this is something that, I think our audience knows that I struggle more with PTSD than you do. Partly, for obvious reasons that I was branded and you weren't. But I think, and one of the nuggets I got out of that is that I was more invested in NXIVM in terms of like financially and, I bought in more than you did. There's just things that you weren't willing to do and you were like, fuck this about it. And obviously, right, where I was more internally, fuck this.
My livelihood didn't depend on it either.
Right.
I don't want to sit here and flex, I wasn't susceptible. I was susceptible just in different ways.
Totally.
Right.
It helped me remember that like I think we're both sensitive. Underneath that tough, nippy exterior, there is a very sensitive Nippy that we all love.
No, there's not, Sarah. Don't tell people that.
But I think I'm more, it's not fragile. I just take things personally more. It kind of pulled things together for me in a way that's why I'm actively constantly trying to get into parasympathetic versus getting out of sympathetic, and just remembering, so much of was a lot of the things she talked about, we actually learned partly in NXIVM. Like Nancy taught us about the nature of fight or flight. And she didn't say the word amygdala hijack, but how all the adrenaline goes to your limbs and you're ready to fight. But what I hadn't linked together is that a lot of what we did in the training in terms of state control, which has come up recently in the Vow Season 3, is getting into what she called an intensity state. And remember, there was that exercise, like how to do something as if your life depended on it. And this was a state you could get into if you wanted to get something done very quickly. You could get into intensity state. And the example they used is like your place is a mess and someone's saying, hey, I'll be there in 5 minutes. If you got into an intensity state, and you could clean your home or tidy your home as if your life depended on it, you could be very effective, which cool, great tool to have in your tool belt. I think that many of the leadership, and myself included, lived in intensity state. I was just go, 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 doing things as if my life depended on it. It was very hard to transition out of that. And that continued and then amped up when we left. And that was sort of like the basis of my PTSD. So much of what I do to counter that is, going to yoga and getting grounded, going to the woods and all the things that I talk about all the time. But I think that's the sort of the main nugget that I got, is understanding how that works, how to evolve it, how to stop, and how to also deal with people who are dealing with it. Like, I think one of the things for our relationship that's been really helpful is there's been times when I've been like so whacked out in the sympathetic PTSD craziness. And you're like, I don't know what to do with you. And I'm like, you don't have to do anything except like hug me and tell me it's going to be okay. And I think that's a good nugget for people who have loved ones who are recovering or reclaiming. I want to use that word. Can we talk about our listeners as listeners and reclaimers from now on? How do you feel about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I can go with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause we've in season 1 and 2, we were trying to find a name for the people came up with like thrivers and I don't know, all sorts of different.
Well, back to what you're saying about the nervous systems. I heard this one podcast, I don't remember where, the guy was talking about, it's like, with all this stuff and how we're getting our sound bites, it's people just throwing shrapnel into your central nervous system. And how do you take it out? And how do people build awareness about what's being done? Because some people do, and this depends on how you think, how deep things go, but you would have to believe at some point there are people that are armed with the knowledge of how the human psychology and physiology works and how they direct their social media, bots, if you will, to those nervous systems directly. They're specifically designed to get you to do that. And so if that's the case and you're not aware of this stuff, you're in essence a puppet to these mechanisms that are just pulling the levers of your amygdala.
Well, that's the thing, is it's all about the awareness, right? I love the line that she said about using the voices in your head in a positive way. And it's a fine line between like spiritual woo-woo, spiritual bypassing, where you're overriding what's going on with you, which is different than helping yourself transition out of a reaction that you're in danger when you're actually not. Maybe that's a conversation for another expert, because I'm not sure when to do what at this point. When do you go, okay, this is a feeling I need to address versus this is a fight or flight reaction based on a past experience and I'm actually fine and I'm going to ground and be in the now. And dare I say, I don't want to bring up Eckhart again because it was so controversial, but this is the part of it that I extracted for myself. It doesn't work for you. Skip it, throw it in the garbage. I don't care. We are not saying he is the new guru by any means. I don't want people to think that. It's just a tool for my tool belt of being present in the moment when I'm actually fine, which is different than trying to get present in the moment and pretend things are fine when you're not fine. So that's the conversation that I think is still ongoing. You know what I mean?
Totally agree.
The other thing I really liked is that, there are, and I think we're going to do another episode on this. I've seen a lot of questions in Patreon and over on Instagram, like, how do you have a positive community? Is there any green flags to recognize when you're being supported and it's healthy? And I believe there are churches that do that. I just haven't experienced it because I don't go to church, but I do believe there's churches that do that. Mm-hmm. And I love that we have a supportive community here where we can have civil discourse about what tools work and what doesn't. And that includes people sharing their spiritual journey, which I'm still on. And that, we make mistakes in that journey in terms of
which is a great segue. Sarah.
To some questions?
Segway
Do you have some
Sarah.
questions for me?
Yeah, I do have some questions.
Is that my new nickname? Segway Sarah?
Segway Sarah.
Okay. What were your favorite questions from Patreon?
Okay, this is from Jackie Shemwell. How did you feel about what Nancy said about trying to separate the, quote, sex crimes part from the case from the, quote, other crimes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that this 6-episode arc in The Vow has some redemption for her, but that, those first few episodes don't bode well in terms of how she's trying to vindicate herself and clearly trying to avoid responsibility. It's frustrating because we know now that the two things were intrinsically linked. And we've always, in the other interviews that we've done since speaking about this, tried to explain that there was the personal development on the outside and then like the sex cult stuff on the inside. In other words, you could take training and not know about it, which is true. But for her as the leader, she had to know about all of it. And perhaps she didn't know about the branding until, we blew the whistle and exposed it. But she certainly knew that Keith was having sex with multiple women in the leadership. And she knows that because she was EMing people on their jealousy issues and having to, quote, share his penis. So it's frustrating.
Yeah.
That's how it felt. How about you?
I would just say that's her campaign to minimize her association with abuses. I think it's nothing more. The mere fact that she had to EM people on Keith's sexual behavior with the women that were there to work on personal and professional development. That's the reason they signed up. And then protect that she was doing that to everyone else, knowing that he was preying on women. Sorry, Nancy. It's just not buying anything that she's selling. I think that's because she was acclimated to the abusive behavior that was going on, or just simply didn't have a problem with it, which neither are good looks.
How did you feel when Nancy allowed her anger to show for a minute? This is from Karen Giuliano. How did you feel when Nancy allowed her anger to show for a minute there at the end? The real Nancy, in my honest opinion, and then tucked it away neatly back in her pocket. I found it to be terrifying, like watching an alien pop out of its human suit for a moment. Yeah, how'd you feel?
So here's what I think. I think she was showing people how good the tools worked when she was explaining it. And I think she's that unaware of
how fucked up it is.
Yes. Look, I think she's going, here's what we do, blah, 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 or not. And she's showing that she's an example of it, but not really recognizing nobody gives a shit about it. This is how it ended up. You just showed how you got away with your abuse. She isn't reconciled. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. No, it looks sociopathic.
Yeah. It looks sociopathic. So crazy. I'm not necessarily convinced she is. I just think she's totally lost sensitivity to that. That's not a positive thing you just did. And I think she's selling it. This is what our tools do, right?
Yeah.
Knowing like that's how she sold the curriculum.
Blah.
Well, look at how it came off. Look at how Karen Giuliano is asking the question.
Yeah. No, I mean, a number of people, and I saw that on
Karen.
Instagram a lot. Thank you, Karen. Okay, you got another one for me?
This one's from Gigglebit. I'm curious about the intent of Das. Originally, I thought the master-slave relationships was about surrender and discipline, but listening to the way folks described being, quote, at cause in the ESP curriculum and listening to the strong emphasis loyalists focus so strongly on women's, quote, choice in giving consent to something undefined. I wonder, was the abuse in Das intentional and pre-planned? Was the whole thing some terrible and intentional exercise in getting the members of Das to make a, quote, choice, setting them up for abuse, and then having some twisted higher purpose and reconciling being at cause? I guess the question overall is, was the abuse in Das intentional and pre-planned?
As far as we know, Keith needed a way to keep women loyal and have a fresh supply for sex for him. So, and he needed to make it look like everyone chose. So that's on the main tenet of what we all learned in NXIVM for years. Everything's choice. We chose, we agreed, we gave our collateral willingly, which is bullshit because we gave our collateral willingly based on a lie that we were joining a women's group for women's empowerment, not we were joining a group where we're giving collateral for Keith's personal spank bank, right? So this was totally intentional and pre-planned. Maybe not all the women understood that because they were so indoctrinated to please him and do whatever their master wanted, but all of it, Das rests on the concept of at cause and is dependent on it. So everything is is designed for abuse, but can always have plausible deniability that it's not that.
Yeah, I think it was pre-planned to scratch all his indulgences.
So this is actually a question I think I got from my Instagram. I didn't catch the name. I copy and pasted it into my notes. I didn't catch the name. So whoever this is, thank you. Have been following and watching The Vow and other docs and listening to the podcast, watching YouTube clips, etc. Have been continually fascinated, intrigued, and appalled. Glad you got out and doing what you're doing. There's so many interviews and accounts of women documented, but relatively little and few accounts from men other than Nippy and Mark. Can you or will you guys shed some light on the male member dynamic? Were they involved in similar rituals? Were they indoctrinated to facilitate Keith's plan regarding the women or influenced to act similarly? Did some men have their own master slave groups with men or women? Curious. Thank you. Nice work. Also, who will play you guys in the movie?
The short answer is no. However, Mark and I have been talking, and he's starting to think, and I don't necessarily agree with him, but nothing would surprise me, that there may have been some other men's thing where they collateralize something. And he thinks some of the people that are still loyal may have been part of that, and then that maybe Mark and I were bypassed. I don't necessarily think that, but at this point, like with everything that we've been wrong about and what's come out, I don't know. But in terms of what you've seen in DOS, there's nothing like that except for some collateral stuff about like, if I don't enroll a person this month, I'm going to give $250 to a charity or something like that. Who's going to play us in a movie?
There was a terrible Lifetime
Hopefully
movie made a couple of years ago, and we can't even talk about it. It was terrible. I'll add something. I mean, just from my perspective, it seemed like, as coaches, the men and women had some similar roles. There were more female facilitators, like in terms of teaching the curriculum, and more women. I mean, generally, more women were involved. And at the time, I always thought it was because they were more interested in doing the introspective work. It's sort of a cliche in terms of the emotional work. But we had quite a few men. And I think that things changed and got more intense as SOP and Jeunesse were introduced. But in terms of similar rituals, I mean, SOP had rituals in terms of like men getting together and, they would stand if people were late, and they'd go like stand in really early hours of the morning in silence and waiting for somebody who was late. I mean, maybe you can speak more to that, but that's a kind of a ritual, isn't it, Nip?
No, there wasn't a whole lot of that though.
Okay. Well, I wasn't part of it, so I can't comment, but there was definitely more women than men in NXIVM.
It wasn't sexual abuse.
No. See, women were brought into the pipeline, we know now, for Keith. And I think the men were there to protect him and like a Nippy's sake, to be the face of it. Like, hey, look, we got this Ivy League former quarterback, I
don't even know if it was that.
We don't know.
Sarah,
we don't know. But what we do know is that you served a different purpose for him. Don't you think?
Yep.
Okay.
This is Jackie Shemwell again, because I just like this question. On Mark Vicente's podcast, where he debriefed episode 3, he kept calling Mark Elliott a good man. He protested him as a victim under Keith's spell. Y'all offered a different view in your debrief. When does victim cross over into perpetrator, like in the case of Allison and Mark Elliott?
Oh, man. I mean, I don't even know how to answer that. I do think Mark is a good person. I really do. I think he's been incredibly misguided.
Let me challenge you there. If you just met him for the first time, would you call him a good person?
Yeah.
No, I'd call him an asshole. You're totally insensitive to the people that have been abused. This is a totally self-serving thing that you're doing. You don't care about people that you're steamrolling with your
Are you talking about meeting him now?
You're totally using cognitive dissonance.
Talking about meeting him now?
Yeah, if you're going to meet him for the first time right now.
Oh, okay.
For the
Sorry.
first time right now.
I'm saying when I met him originally for the first time, I thought he was a good person.
So people are good, and then something happens to them where they become, quote, bad. You can get into the semantics of good and bad, but I think the essence of this question is when did these people stop getting a hall pass for being good people who are just conned, and when can you call them vitriolic and mean people? And that's what they're all being right now.
I guess.
Every single one.
I guess I have to look at like what we learned from Dan Shaw when we were first getting out ourselves, and I had to face how I gaslit people, or I wasn't kind or good to people in my as part of my journey of healing. And Dan reminded me is that when there's a toxic gaslighting leader at the top, and that's how we are trained to work with people, we're all going to do it. So there's a part of me that understands that. But for Mark,
Sarah, you weren't standing in burned ashes of a building with bodies
No,
all
I know.
around you.
I know.
You were
I'm
trying
just
to enroll
extending.
people. They are.
I'm trying to extend a little bit of grace to like, that's not how he was when I met him. That's all.
We've done plenty of that for them.
Okay. So don't do it anymore.
In the face of them. This is what I'm saying is I think this is the essence of this question for me. And this is kind of where I'm going. It's like, we've done plenty of hold the line for them, plenty of like whatever. Every single one of them has had a friend or family member reach out to us for help. No one in our families and none of our friends are calling them, to see that we need help to see it their way. Like, how mean do they have to get and vitriolic do they have to get before a good man evolves into you're a vitriolic, spiteful, hateful person right now and you're toxic? And the hall pass of good man, like, how long do you hold their hand before it's like, hey, look, and eventually, I think this is going for them because like take their behavior out into 5-10 years from now as an algorithm. They're not getting kinder. They're not getting nicer. They're not getting more empathetic. They're getting more mean. They're spreading more lies. They're willing to do more and more things to justify their narrative and impose it on the victims and the people who are actually hurt. What's the line? When did they cease to become a good man? Look, I agree. Mark's heart, as far as I could tell when I was around him, good guy. Love to see him make the shift. He could turn this into a positive if he wanted to. Why doesn't he want to? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think those questions are valuable as well. So when does victim cross over into perpetrator? It's a great question.
One thing we didn't talk about on our vow after debrief is what the conversation you saw with Isabella. There was many of those. And there was some even with Mark and Isabella where we were listening.
They were infuriating.
What you saw with Mark
was okay to be upset
way
with these
worse.
People.
Mark gaslit her even worse than what you saw. But I'm so glad that they showed it. And I'm so glad that they showed how Isabella fought back. It was kind, but it was well done.
Firm.
When he said, you're ruining the Tourette's. And she goes, whose Tourette's? Mine, yours, or the study? That was so boss. I loved that.
Oh, it was so great. And he said, I love you, hon.
Honestly, it was really gross.
Look, those
it was
are all
really
fair
gross.
Questions. I think all the responses can be somewhat appropriate. To not be sensitive to where they are, means we haven't really reconciled ours. But at a certain point, like, I think they're toxic and you got to get away from them and not engage them and not give them a platform. I've always said the best thing to do for them is leave them alone. Let them run out of air.
Okay, so now we're going to play some of the voicemails over on our website. So thanks, everybody. We've got so many. Here's just a few, and we'll do some more next week for sure. So let's start with Andrea Brown.
Hello, Sarah and Nippy. I was wondering if you guys are ever going to do a podcast regarding Landmark Forum. I was involved for a short time and very culty. And I was just wondering if that was on your radar. I was involved in it. I had a boss that said, hey, I have something I want you to get involved in. And I went and I literally lasted like one day and it just gave me the creeps. They wouldn't let you go to the bathroom. It was very cultish and strange. There were plants in the room. It was just very, very strange. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. So anyway, I was just wondering if you were going to cover that in one of your episodes. I think it would be interesting. I think people would find it interesting, and probably a lot of people have been involved and would want to speak out. Like I said, I wasn't involved for very long, but it really creeped me out. And I still remember this day how I felt. I just, I got up, I said, I have to go make a phone call. And basically they said, we really don't want you to leave, and hovered over me while I used the phone. This was before everybody had a cell phone. But hovered over me and, was like, you can't leave. And I was like, I can leave whenever I want. It was just very strange. Anyway, just curious if you're going to do that. So I think people would find it interesting. Okay, have a good day. Thanks. Bye.
First of all, we'd love to do an episode on Landmark. What you just said, you can't leave or question, are two of the biggest reasons we want to do an episode on it. The red flags are the things that bring us towards an organization. However, they're protected. Another red flag. They've got a great legal team and they will go after you legally if you do that. So it's one of the things we're navigating. A couple other people have done episodes on them and gotten some letters to take down their podcasts about it. We won't name names.
Yeah, I think that most people don't touch it because they do have such a intense legal team that just shuts everybody down, which should be a red flag in and of itself, that people can't speak about their experience. If it can't stand up to scrutiny, as Stephen Hatson says, then that's a massive red flag for me. But from what I can see and from what people have told us, it's really all the same problems as NXIVM minus the branding and perhaps the, sexual aspect in the inner circle. But in terms of the manipulation and the coercion, as far as we know. But ultimately, yes, it's on our list. We've just been trying to find the right person to interview, and it's just like a little bit scary for us legally. So yes, stand by. And thanks for reaching out to us, Andrea Brown.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm also known as Queerbee on Instagram. I have messaged Sarah a couple times because I love y'all. Anyways, you know what fucking chaps my ass is watching The Vow season 2, and I'm a mental health counselor, and listening to these fuck faces act like Keith created cognitive behavioral therapy and basic psychotherapeutic tools that we all use. I just can't. Also, I'm realizing I have a little bit of empathy for Nancy, watching this most recent one where she is being honest about how Keith treated her. I was like, I fucking knew it. So I'm just glad she's coming to terms with that. Still fucking chaps my ass though. These people, I mean, come on. You did not invent narrative therapy and a lot of the stuff that many of us use. And we're not special. We're not special using it. We're just doing basic human stuff. So fucking Keith, dude, that fuck face. So you can air this. I don't know if you can because I fucking dropped F-bombs as I do. Anyways, love you what y'all do. Keep it up. Thank you.
Megan, we love the F-bombs. Listen, girl after my own heart. I feel the same way. I'm glad she's coming to terms with how Keith treated her. And like I said with Mark earlier, it's both. It's always both. I think she probably was a good person at the beginning. She did some fucked up things and needs to be held accountable.
Well, I think also how they handle it determines if they're a good person or ever were. Mm-hmm. When you find that you've participated in something that's been detrimental and you thought it was good, then what do you do with it? You fix it. Like I said that in first season, you go just go fix it. And fixing it, you learn more. And yeah, as for the tech and the cognitive behavior, like that's pretty much been the response across the board from people who are superficially involved with cognitive behavior therapy. Like they just go, what? This, and like she said, we're not special. It's like, it's standard practice. And I think it's almost embarrassing hearing that, thinking that we thought we were doing something, but they don't want to hear that. They're not going to hear it. And I think the story is more about the grasp of the belief system of what they're doing is good has on them. No amount of information is going to make them pivot. They're just going to make you bad and wrong and deny your experience, blah, blah, blah. You know the drill.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you, Megan. Ass chapping across the board.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And by the way, that was verified also by my therapist when I tried to explain some of the processes that we did. He's like, yeah, that's kind of psychology tool set like, 101.
They're there, Sarah. Thanks. No, that's great. Yeah.
Oh, man. Appreciate the interaction. Nippy and I are blown away by you Patreon fans. Awesome. It's really like heartwarming and meaningful to us. And onwards and upwards.
Thanks for the questions, everybody.
See you soon.
Patreon. Little big culty. Little big culty. Little big culty. Little big culty.
Did you know a 2018 study showed half of prenatal vitamins tested had unacceptable levels of heavy metals? I'm Kat, mother of 3 and founder of Ritual. When I was 4 months pregnant, I couldn't find a prenatal I could trust, so I created my own. Ours is made traceable, third-party tested for heavy metals, and recently earned the Purity Award from the Clean Label Project. But don't just take my word for it. Get 25% off at ritual.com/prenatal.